The Intersystem Academy for Harmonious Species Integration occupied a space station so ludicrously massive that it had its own weather patterns. Well, carefully controlled atmospheric phenomena that the marketing department insisted on calling weather patterns because it sounded more prestigious. The station orbited a politically neutral moon, which itself orbited a politically neutral planet, which itself existed in a politically neutral star system that had been specifically chosen because absolutely nothing interesting had ever happened there. Perfect for education. For 300 standard cycles, the Academy had served as the premier institution for molding the galaxy's youth into proper, civilized, cooperative members of interstellar society. Students from 700 species studied together, played together, and learned to navigate the complex social dynamics of a universe where your lab partner might breathe methane and communicate through color-changing skin patterns. The Academy's success rate was impressive. Only 12 major diplomatic incidents in 3 centuries, and most of those involved the Zinthori, who really should have mentioned that their mating season made them temporarily psychotic. The faculty prided themselves on their ability to handle any species, any temperament, any cultural quirk the galaxy could produce. They had protocols for lithium-based life forms, procedures for beings who existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously, and special accommodations for species whose life cycle included a phase as sentient gas. They had seen everything, which made their decision to accept a student from Earth either remarkably brave or catastrophically stupid. Time would tell. Time always did, usually while laughing. Earth, Deathworld 7 on the official registry. Quarantine status, absolute. Recommended observation protocol. From a significant distance, preferably from behind something solid. The planet had been flagged by every survey team that had gotten close enough to scan it, and their reports read less like scientific documents and more like horror stories shared around a campfire. Gravity that would crush most species into paste. An atmosphere that was technically breathable, but contained enough oxygen to be mildly flammable. Weather patterns that included water falling from the skies with enough force to be weaponized. And the life forms. Oh, the life forms. The dominant species called themselves humans, and they had done what no rational species should be able to do. They had survived. Not just survived, but thrived on a planet that seemed actively designed to kill them. They had conquered their world through a combination of persistence, spite, and what the xenobiologists politely termed an alarming disregard for reasonable self-preservation. But the galactic community prided itself on inclusivity. After decades of debate, committees, subcommittees, and committees organized specifically to argue about the subcommittees, a decision had been reached. Earth would be allowed to send 1 student to the Academy. 1. As a test. To see if humans could be civilized, or if they would do something horrifying like eat their classmates or explode. The human delegation had accepted with what the diplomats described as suspicious enthusiasm. Professor Kilnix stood at the main entrance of the Academy's primary educational complex, all 4 of his hands clasped behind his back in a pose he believed conveyed authority. As a Telvari, his species had been guiding galactic education for millennia, and he was not about to let some Deathworld primitive disrupt his carefully maintained institution. He had prepared. Oh, how he had prepared. The humans' dormitory had been equipped with gravity generators tuned to Earth specifications. The atmospheric mixture had been precisely calibrated. Medical staff had been briefed on human biology, insofar as the limited data allowed. Security protocols had been established. The human would be monitored, studied, and carefully guided towards civilized behavior. Everything was under control. The transport shuttle arrived precisely on schedule. because even Deathworlders apparently understood punctuality. The airlock cycled, and Professor Kilnix prepared himself to meet whatever horror evolution had sculpted on that nightmare planet. A girl walked out. She was small, barely reached chest height on a standard Telvari, which made her positively diminutive by galactic standards. Soft features, no visible armor plating or natural weapons, limbs that looked fragile enough to snap in a stiff breeze. She wore what the briefing had called typical Earth adolescent attire. Some sort of cloth covering her torso with a faded image of what might have been a predator's face. Lower limb coverings that had been deliberately torn for reasons the xenoanthropologists were still debating, and foot coverings that looked more decorative than functional. A bag hung from one shoulder, probably containing whatever primitive tools her species found necessary for education. She smiled at Professor Kilnix, and he noticed her teeth were mostly flat with only slightly prominent canines, practically herbivorous. "Hi," she said, in perfectly accented galactic common. At least the humans had bothered to teach their delegate the proper language. "I am really excited to be here. Thanks for having me." Professor Kilnix felt his anxiety drain away. This was no monster. This was a child, barely threatening enough to disturb a Fluffnarian bunny analog. The committees had been worried about nothing. "Welcome to the Academy," he said, voice warm with relief. "I am certain you will find your time here educational." If Professor Kilnix had been paying attention, if he had been watching closely, he might have noticed the way her eyes tracked every movement in the corridor, cataloging exits and potential threats with mechanical precision. He might have observed how she positioned herself with clear sight lines in all directions despite her casual posture. He might have seen that her smile never quite reached those eyes, which remained cold and calculating behind their friendly facade. But he did not notice. None of them did. The orientation proceeded smoothly. The human was introduced to her dormitory cluster, where she would share common spaces with a dozen other first-cycle students. The reactions were mixed and telling. Rexith, a Vryn who stood nearly 3 meters tall and possessed the kind of natural armor that made personal shields redundant, took one look at the human and dismissed her entirely. Prey species. Weak. Unworthy of attention. He returned to sharpening his ceremonial combat claws, a habit his species maintained despite having achieved spaceflight 10,000 years ago. Melara and Jessic, a bonded pair of Quilxi, practically vibrated with anxiety when the human entered the common room. Their species had evolved as prey on a relatively gentle world, and their instincts screamed warnings about predators despite the Academy's assurances of safety. But the humans seemed so small, so harmless. They relaxed marginally, though Melara kept one eye stalk pointed at the newcomer at all times. Zorthen, who existed as a collective consciousness distributed across 7 crystalline bodies, found the whole situation amusing. Their species had transcended physical concerns millennia ago, and they observed the other students' reactions with the detached interest of a scientist watching bacteria interact. "You are the human," Rexith finally said, his voice carrying the kind of dismissive tone that bullies apparently developed regardless of species. "From the quarantine world." "That's me," the human agreed cheerfully. "Nice to meet you." "I have heard your planet is dangerous," Rexith continued, his mandibles clicking in what passed for Vryn laughter. "Yet you appear quite fragile. Perhaps the reports were exaggerated." "Maybe," the human said, still smiling. "Earth can be pretty intense." "Intense," Rexith repeated, savoring the word. "I come from a world with 6 times standard gravity and atmospheric pressure that would collapse most species' lungs. I wonder what a soft creature like you would consider intense. The human's smile widened slightly. Well, back home we have these things called mosquitoes. They are tiny flying insects that drink blood. Not enough to hurt you, really, but they are super annoying and they can carry diseases that kill millions. Also, we have this weather pattern called a hurricane where the wind moves so fast it can throw cars around like toys, and it can be hundreds of kilometers wide. Oh, and sometimes the ground just shakes and splits open because the planet's crust is actually floating on molten rock and the pieces bump into each other. The room had gone very quiet. And that is normal? Melara asked, her voice small. I mean, it does not happen every day, the human said. Just often enough that you kind of get used to it. Oh, but we did have this one year where a volcano erupted and the ash cloud was so big it changed the climate for like a decade. That was before my time, though. History class stuff. Zorthen's crystals flickered with what might have been concern. Your planet attempted to kill your species with climate modification? Well, not on purpose. The human laughed. That is just what volcanoes do. We have like 50 or 60 active ones at any given time. Professor Kilnix, who had been observing the interaction, felt a small tendril of doubt creep into his mind. He activated his personal data pad and queued up a search for Earth's geological activity. The results made his respiratory organs constrict. The first class was xenobiology, taught by Professor Yinsara, a Kaldorian whose species had been studying comparative biology since before humans had discovered fire. She was brilliant, patient, and utterly confident in her understanding of how evolution shaped species across the galaxy. Life, she began, her voice resonating through the lecture hall, follows predictable patterns. Prey species develop speed, camouflage, or defensive mechanisms. Predator species develop strength, weapons, or pack tactics. Environmental pressures shape organisms toward optimal survival strategies. This is universal law. The human sat in the third row, taking notes on a primitive paper notebook with a mechanical graphite deposition device. Professor Yinsara found it charmingly archaic. Consider the Vryn, she continued, gesturing to where Rexith sat with his characteristic arrogance. High-gravity world, scarce resources, significant predation pressure. Evolution's answer, armored hide, enhanced strength, aggressive territorial behavior. Logical, predictable, efficient. Rexith preened slightly at being used as a positive example. Now, what of humans? Professor Yinsara brought up a holographic image of a standard human anatomy chart. Relatively soft skin, no natural armor, modest strength by galactic standards, minimal natural weaponry. By all standard metrics, this species should have been evolutionary dead end. Prey at best. The human raised her hand. Yes, dear? Professor Yinsara said warmly. Just a clarification question, the human said. When you say minimal natural weaponry, are you counting our endurance hunting capabilities? Because humans can run for hours without stopping. We literally used to chase prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. It is called persistence hunting. Professor Yinsara's facial tendrils twitched. Hours? Without rest? Oh, sure. Some humans do these things called ultramarathons where they run for like 100 miles. Takes most of the day, but it is doable. Our ancestors could track wounded prey for days if necessary. We just kept following until it died. The class was staring now. Melara had wrapped her tentacles around herself in a self-protective gesture. That is atypical for a prey species. Professor Yinsara admitted. Well, we are not really prey species, the human said. We are apex predators, pretty much the top of the food chain on Earth. I mean, there are some things that can kill us, like sharks or bears or crocodiles, but usually only if we are being careless. Mostly, we are the scary ones. Apex predators, Rexith scoffed. You are barely larger than a quilksy. What could you possibly hunt? Mammoths, mostly, the human said casually. At least our ancestors did. They were like these huge, hairy elephant things, probably weighed 6 tons each, had massive tusks. We used to hunt them by working in groups, using tools and tactics. Before that, we hunted other megafauna to extinction. We are actually really good at extinction events. Caused a bunch of them, survived a bunch more. Professor Yinsara was rapidly accessing her database, cross-referencing human evolutionary history with what the student was describing. The data was fragmented, but what she found made her respiratory rate increase. Your species hunted creatures weighing 6,000 kilograms, she asked carefully. Well, yeah. We needed the meat and fur. Earth gets really cold in some places. Like, cold enough to kill you in minutes if you are not prepared. So we needed protection, and the big animals had the best pelts. How cold? Zorthan asked, their crystals pulsing with genuine curiosity. The human considered. Average winter temperature where my ancestors evolved was probably around -20 degrees. Sometimes colder. Water turned solid at 0 for reference. You lived in environments where the primary solvent of life undergoes phase transitions? Professor Yinsara's voice had climbed an octave. And this was considered normal? I mean, we invented insulated clothing and heating systems pretty early on, the human said. Problem solving is kind of our thing. When the environment tries to kill you, you adapt or die, and humans are very good at not dying. The professor made a note to substantially revise her lecture materials. Lunch in the Academy's massive cafeteria was an exercise in cultural exchange. With 700 species represented, the food services had been designed to accommodate practically any dietary requirement. Crystalline species had mineral supplements. Energy beings had specialized radiation booths. Carbon-based life forms had options ranging from photosynthetic nutrients to various forms of organic matter. The human approached the serving area with her tray, examining the options with interest. She selected what appeared to be a protein synthesized to approximate Earth-standard meat, some vegetation that had been analyzed as compatible with human digestion, and what the menu described as a beverage approximating Earth-standard water, but purified of dangerous minerals. Then she reached into her bag. "What is that?" Malara asked nervously, eyeing the small container the human had produced. "Hot sauce," the human said cheerfully. "They tried, but the food here is kind of bland. No offense to the cooks." "What does it do?" Jessica asked. "Makes things spicy, adds flavor." The human opened the container and applied a small amount to her protein. The pungent aroma made several nearby students' eyes water. "Is that a toxin?" Rexith demanded, his nose slits flaring. "I mean, technically capsaicin triggers pain receptors," the human admitted. "It makes your mouth feel like it is burning. But humans like that sensation. We bred plants specifically to be more painful to eat." "You consume pain for enjoyment?" Professor Kilnix, who had been observing from a nearby table, felt his concern returning with renewed vigor. "Sure. Pain reminds you that you are alive, right?" The human took a bite and smiled despite her eyes watering slightly. "Besides, it is not that hot. I forgot to bring the really good stuff from home. This is only about 50,000 Scoville units." No one knew what a Scoville unit was, but it sounded ominous. "You did not answer my question in class," Rexith said, apparently deciding to reassert his dominance. "What gives you the right to claim apex predator status? You are small, weak, and soft." The human looked at him with those disconcertingly calm eyes. "Well, I would not want to fight you," she said. "That would be against Academy rules, and I am here to learn, not cause problems." "That is not an answer." "Okay, honestly, humans have advantages that are not obvious. Our eyes, for example." She pointed to her own. "Binocular vision, excellent depth perception, can track fast movement. We are really good at seeing things, and our hands have precision grips that let us manipulate tools with extreme accuracy. Plus the endurance thing I mentioned. And our brains are wired for pattern recognition and tactical thinking. We can predict what other animals are going to do and plan around it." "All species have brains," Rexith growled. "Sure, but human brains are weird. We can override our survival instincts with logic. We can make ourselves do things that scare us because we understand why it is necessary. And we are really good at cooperation. Like, scary good. We can coordinate in groups to accomplish things that would be impossible individually. This is standard pack predator behavior," Rexith dismissed. "Maybe, but we take it further. We can cooperate with complete strangers, even different species. We can create social structures with millions of individuals working toward common goals. And when we decide something needs to be done, we are incredibly persistent. Like, we shot ourselves into space using controlled explosions before we really understood the math properly. Just decided we were going to do it and kept trying until it worked." Zorthan's crystals flickered rapidly. "You achieved spaceflight through trial and error? That seems inefficient." "Oh, it was super inefficient. People died. But we did it. Anyway, because humans are really bad at accepting limitations." The table had gone quiet again. This kept happening. Physical education was mandatory at the Academy, designed to help students maintain whatever form of fitness their species required. The gymnasium was equipped with variable gravity zones, atmospheric controlled sections, and specialized equipment for species ranging from aquatic to photosynthetic. Today's assessment was endurance-based. Each student would run at their species' optimal pace for as long as they could maintain it. The results would establish baselines for personalized fitness programs. Rexith, predictably, went first. He thundered across the track in the high-gravity zone, his armored forms shaking the floor with each step. He managed 6 laps before his breathing became labored. Respectable for a Vryn, and he made sure everyone knew it. Melara and Jessic opted for the low-gravity zone, their species having evolved in gentler conditions. They completed their assessment adequately, managing 12 laps before exhaustion set in. Various other species cycled through, each performing within expected parameters. Then came the human's turn. She had changed into what she called athletic wear. Thin, flexible fabric that seemed utterly inadequate for physical exertion. She stretched briefly, performing movements that suggested extremely flexible joints, then positioned herself at the starting line in the standard gravity zone. "Begin when ready," the instructor called. The human started running. Not quickly by galactic standards, her pace was almost leisurely. After the first lap, Rexith snorted derisively. "Is that all?" he called out. "My grandmother moves faster." The human did not respond, just maintained her steady pace. Second lap, third lap. Her breathing remained even, controlled. 10th lap. Other students were starting to pay attention. The human had been running for nearly 20 minutes without slowing. 20th lap. The human's skin had begun secreting liquid. Clear fluid ran down her face and arms, and the instructor made an alarmed sound. "Are you injured?" she called out. "Is that blood?" "Just sweat." The human called back, not breaking stride. Evaporative cooling. Humans regulate temperature by secreting water from our skin. It is normal. "You leak?" Melara looked horrified. "When we overheat, yeah. It is actually really efficient." 30th lap. The human had been running for over 40 minutes. She had outlasted every other student by a significant margin, and she still was not stopping. Her breathing had deepened, but remained rhythmic. More sweat poured from her skin, and her face had turned a shade darker with increased blood flow. "You may stop now," the instructor said, concerned. "We have sufficient data." "I am good," the human said. "I can keep going. This is just a light jog." 50th lap. An hour of continuous running. The instructor was frantically checking human baseline data, trying to determine if this was normal or if the student was somehow injuring herself without realizing it. "Please stop," she insisted. "This is beyond requirements." The human finally slowed, then stopped. She bent over, hands on her knees, breathing deeply but steadily. After perhaps 30 seconds, she straightened up, still dripping sweat but apparently fine. "Sorry," she said. "I probably should have stopped earlier. I am just used to longer runs. I did not mean to freak anyone out." The gymnasium was silent, except for the sound of the human's breathing returning to normal with remarkable speed. "How long could you have continued?" Zorthan asked quietly. The human shrugged. "I mean, I am not in great shape right now. Maybe another hour? 2? Humans can run for like 6 or 8 hours if we pace ourselves properly. Some people do it for fun." Rexith's mandibles hung open. "For fun?" he repeated. "Yeah, we have these events called marathons where people run about 42 kilometers. Takes a few hours. Then there are ultra-marathons that are even longer. Some people run across entire continents. It is considered a challenge, but it is definitely doable." Professor Yinsara, who had been observing from the control booth, pulled up data on human evolutionary biology. The pieces were starting to fit together in a deeply disturbing way. Humans had evolved as persistence hunters. They had outlasted faster, stronger prey by simply refusing to stop. They had turned endurance into a weapon, and they had sent a teenage example to demonstrate this capability. Social studies should have been safe. It was just comparative civilization, discussing how different species approached governance, culture, and social organization. Peaceful, theoretical, harmless. The instructor, Professor Thelminus, decided to focus on conflict resolution, thinking it would be educational for the students to understand how civilized species avoided violence. "War is, thankfully, rare in modern galactic society," he began. "Most species recognize the futility of armed conflict after developing spaceflight. The resources required, the potential for mutual destruction, the ethical implications, these factors generally prevent serious consideration of warfare." The human raised her hand again. She had been doing that a lot, and the instructors were beginning to dread it. "Yes?" Professor Thelminus said cautiously. "That is really impressive," the human said genuinely. "Humans are still working on that. We have had a lot of wars." "Define a lot," the professor requested, though he was not sure he wanted to know. "Well, we have had at least one major war every century for the last several thousand years. Some centuries had dozens. We literally have a field of study dedicated to analyzing them called military history. And we number our world wars because we have had multiple conflicts that involved pretty much every major civilization on the planet fighting simultaneously. The class stared. "Surely you exaggerate," Professor Thelminas said weakly. "I really wish I was. We have gotten better about it recently, though. We have gone almost 80 years without a really big one. That is progress." 80 years is a long time for your species? Zorthan asked. "I mean, it is like 3 or 4 generations. For humans, that is pretty good. We used to have wars that lasted decades. One of them went for 100 years, killed like a third of the population in some regions. And you survived as a species?" Professor Thelminas was accessing his database, trying to verify these claims. What he found was fragmentary, but terrifying. "Humans are really hard to kill off completely," the human said. "We have survived ice ages, supervolcano eruptions, plagues that killed half our population, floods, droughts, asteroid impacts. Well, the dinosaurs got the really big asteroid. But we have had some close calls. We just keep going." "You mentioned plagues?" Malara's voice was very small. "Oh yeah, diseases are rough. We have had several that killed millions, still dealing with some. Our immune systems are pretty robust, but evolution is an arms race, you know. Pathogens adapt, we adapt, they adapt again, keeps things interesting." "Interesting," Rexith repeated flatly. "You describe extinction-level events as interesting. I mean, they suck while you are living through them," the human admitted. "But they make for good stories afterward. Humans love stories about surviving impossible situations. We make entertainment about disasters and wars and plagues. We have an entire genre of fiction dedicated to imagining how we would survive apocalyptic scenarios." "You create entertainment by simulating species death?" Professor Thelminas felt faint. "Not just that. We also have stories about fighting aliens, fighting robots, fighting zombies, fighting each other in various future scenarios. Oh, and we have this thing called horror where we scare ourselves on purpose for fun, and action movies where people do dangerous things with lots of explosions, and sports where we compete physically, sometimes in ways that can cause injury, because we enjoy testing ourselves against each other." The professor pulled up a file on human entertainment. What he found would haunt him for years. Humans had created thousands of hours of content depicting violence, disaster, and survival scenarios, and they consumed it voluntarily, for enjoyment. "Your species simulates danger for recreation?" he asked. "I mean, when you say it like that, it sounds weird," the human said. "But yeah, humans like excitement. We get bored easily. So we invented ways to trigger our adrenaline response in controlled environments. We jump out of aircraft with parachutes. We climb mountains that can kill us. We slide down snow-covered slopes at high speeds. We fight each other in sanctioned combat sports. We even eat toxic substances that cause pain because we think it is fun." "The capsaicin," Malara whispered. "Exactly. See? You are getting it." "I am getting that your species is clinically insane," Rexith said. The human laughed. "Maybe a little, but it keeps life interesting. The incident happened during free period, in one of the common recreation areas." The human had been sitting quietly, working on assignments, bothering no one. She had been at the academy for 6 standard days, and while her presence made everyone vaguely uncomfortable in ways they could not quite articulate, there had been no actual problems. Rexith had been growing increasingly irritated by the human's presence. She represented everything that challenged his worldview. She was small, apparently weak, from a species that should have been prey. Yet she displayed capabilities that rivaled or exceeded his own. It was unacceptable. His pride, his sense of natural order, demanded that he re-establish the proper hierarchy. He approached the human with 3 of his friends, all Vryn, all large and armored, and convinced of their superiority. "Deathworlder," Rexith said, his voice carrying across the room. "I have been thinking about your claims, your endurance, your hunting, your survival. I believe you have been exaggerating to seem more impressive." The human looked up from her work. "Okay," she said neutrally. "I challenge you to prove your words. Physical contest. Show me that humans are truly predators and not simply loud prey." The room went silent. Challenges were not uncommon at the academy, though they were supposed to be supervised and regulated. This was neither. The human stood slowly. She was still small, barely reaching Rexith's mid-torso. Her expression remained calm, friendly even. "I do not think that is a good idea," she said. "I am here to learn, not fight." "Because you know you would lose," Rexith pressed. "You hide behind words and endurance tricks, but in actual combat, you would fail. Admit it." Something changed in the human's posture. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but suddenly she did not look quite as harmless. Her weight shifted, her stance widened slightly, her hands relaxed in a way that suggested readiness rather than peace. "Please do not do this," she said quietly. Her voice had changed too, losing the friendly warmth and becoming something flatter, harder. Rexith took it as confirmation of weakness. He lunged forward, claws extended, intending to pin the human and force a submission. It was supposed to be a simple demonstration of dominance. What happened next took approximately 2 seconds and would be analyzed from multiple angles for weeks afterward. The human moved. Not quickly by her own species standards, probably, but faster than anyone watching had thought possible. She did not try to meet Rexith's charge with strength. Instead, she stepped aside with minimal movement, one hand striking out to redirect his momentum. Her other hand targeted a joint in his armor, a vulnerable spot between plates that his species did not consider exploitable. Rexith found himself airborne, his own charge turned against him. He crashed into a furniture unit with enough force to crack the frame. Before he could recover, the human was there, knee positioned against his throat, hand clamped on his primary weapon arm. She had immobilized him completely. Her 3 friends rushed forward. The human noticed them peripherally, another aspect of those binocular predator eyes, excellent motion tracking, and released Rexith to deal with the new threats. She dropped the first one with a sweep that took his legs out from under him. The second she caught mid-lunge with a joint lock that forced him to the ground or risk his arm breaking. The third was the smartest. He actually hesitated. But the human had already moved into his space, inside his reach, where his size became a disadvantage. She struck 3 times with surgical precision, targeting nerve clusters, and he collapsed. Total elapsed time from Rexith's initial lunge to the last attacker falling. 4 seconds. The human stood among the 4 Vryn, breathing slightly harder than normal, but otherwise uninjured. Her eyes swept the room, tracking every student, cataloging positions and threat levels with mechanical efficiency. The mask of friendly humanity had slipped, and what showed underneath was something ancient and terrifying. Then, just as quickly, the mask returned. She stepped back, her posture relaxing, concern crossing her face. "Is everyone okay?" she asked, her voice returning to its usual warm tone. "I did not want to hurt anyone." "You are all okay, right?" Security arrived moments later, alerted by automatic sensors. They found 4 Vrin students groaning on the floor with various bruises and strained joints, and 1 human student who appeared completely unharmed and was apologizing profusely. The security footage told a story that made the reviewing faculty members feel cold. Frame-by-frame analysis revealed something incredible. The human had been holding back, significantly. Every strike had been calculated for minimum damage. She had disabled 4 opponents without causing any injury more serious than bruising. She could have done much worse. The precision required for that level of control was staggering. More disturbing was what the extended surveillance revealed. They reviewed footage from the human's entire stay at the academy. Every movement, every interaction, every casual moment. And they began to see it. The human was always aware, always positioned with clear sight lines, always knew where everyone in a room was located. Her casual friendliness was a choice, a conscious decision to appear non-threatening. But underneath it, she was constantly calculating, constantly assessing, constantly ready. She had never been in danger at the academy. Everyone else had. The emergency faculty meeting extended into the night cycle. Professor Kilnix sat at the head of the table, reviewing reports with growing horror. She has been restraining herself, Professor Yinsara said, her voice shaky. Every interaction, every physical activity, every social situation. She has been deliberately limiting her capabilities. The incident in the recreation area, Professor Thelminas added. She disabled 4 mature Vrin in seconds. But medical analysis shows she could have killed them just as easily. She chose not to. Chose not to, Professor Kilnix repeated. Voluntary restraint. She could have been dangerous at any time, but decided not to be. Is that not a good thing? One of the junior instructors asked. It is terrifying, Professor Yinsara said. Predators who cannot control themselves are dangerous but predictable. Predators who choose to be harmless are something else entirely. It means they understand social structures, consequences, long-term planning. It means they are more intelligent than we assumed. We should review what we know about humans, Professor Kilnix said, pulling up compiled data. Let us see what we missed. The list was extensive and damning. Humans evolved on a high-gravity death world with extreme environmental variations. Correct. Humans were persistence hunters who could track prey for days without stopping. Confirmed by the endurance testing. Humans had binocular vision optimized for tracking fast-moving prey. Evident in the security footage analysis. Humans had precision grip capability, allowing for complex tool use. Observed in her delicate manipulation of writing implements and other objects. Humans had survived multiple extinction-level events through adaptation and cooperation. Verified by historical data, though the details were horrifying. Humans had developed advanced warfare and had been in near constant conflict for thousands of years. The social studies incident had made this abundantly clear. Humans could override survival instincts with logic and social conditioning. Demonstrated perfectly by the recreation area incident, where she had stopped herself from causing serious harm despite being attacked. Humans considered danger recreational, evidenced by her casual discussion of their entertainment and voluntary risk-taking behaviors. They sent us a child, Professor Kilnix said slowly, a juvenile member of their species. And she can do this. The implications hung heavy in the air. What were adult humans capable of? What about their soldiers, their warriors, the individuals they specifically selected and trained for combat? If a friendly teenage human could disable 4 trained Vrin fighters in seconds while actively limiting herself to prevent serious injury, what could a mature human do without restraints? We need to approve them, Professor Yinsara said finally. For galactic contact, for trade, for everything. They nearly killed 4 students, someone objected. 4 students attacked her without provocation, and she defended herself without causing permanent harm, Professor Yinsara countered. She showed remarkable restraint. If the situations had been reversed, if 4 humans had attacked a single Vryn student, I suspect the outcome would have been very different. You think she would have shown mercy? The objector asked. No, Professor Yinsara said. I think the Vryn would not have needed to, because the human would not have survived the first strike. That is the point. She is more dangerous than our strongest warrior species, and she chose not to hurt anyone seriously. That level of control, that capacity for measured response despite being threatened, that is exactly what we need from member species. The vote was unanimous, though several faculty members looked ill as they cast it. Earth would be approved for full galactic contact. The human returned to classes the next day, as if nothing had happened. Rexith and his friends avoided her completely, and the other students gave her significantly more space than before. She seemed saddened by this, making efforts to engage in friendly conversation, but the responses were hesitant at best. Only Zorthen approached her normally, their crystalline forms settling near her during lunch. You have frightened them, Zorthen observed. I did not mean to, the human said. I just defended myself. I tried really hard not to hurt anyone seriously. That is precisely what frightens them. Not that you could harm them, but that you chose not to. It implies calculation, forethought, values beyond simple survival instinct. The human considered this. Humans are social creatures. We need cooperation to survive. So we developed really strong social conditioning. We can make ourselves do or not do things based on social rules, even when our instincts say otherwise. It is not always easy, but it is necessary. And your instincts told you to harm Rexith more seriously? Zorthen asked. My instincts told me to eliminate a threat permanently, the human admitted. But my training and my understanding of the situation told me that would be wrong. He was stupid and aggressive, but he did not deserve to die for it. And I am here to prove humans can coexist with other species, so killing someone would kind of defeat the purpose. You're always doing this? Zorthen asked. Restraining yourself? Every day, the human said. Every interaction. Humans are apex predators from a Deathworld. We have instincts that tell us to establish dominance, to respond to threats with overwhelming force, to see everyone as potential competition. But we are also smart enough to know that is not how you build a civilization. So we learn to control it. We create social structures, laws, ethics. We teach our children to be gentle, to share, to cooperate. It is not perfect, and sometimes humans do terrible things when that control breaks down. But mostly we manage. That seems exhausting, Zorthen said. It can be. But it is also what makes us human. We are not just our instincts. We can choose to be better than what evolution made us. The galaxy, Zorthen said slowly, has never encountered a species quite like yours. Is that good or bad? I believe we are still determining that. The semester continued. Gradually, carefully, the other students began to relax around the human again. She made consistent efforts to be friendly, helpful, and harmless. She tutored Milara in mathematics, helped Jessic with a project on comparative literature, even taught Zorthen how to play a human card game that required bluffing and strategy. She never mentioned the incident. Neither did anyone else. But everyone remembered. Everyone knew that the friendly, cheerful human girl who brought interesting snacks and asked thoughtful questions in class was also something much more dangerous. They knew she could move with predatory speed, strike with calculated precision, and disable threats efficiently. They knew she was always aware, always ready, always holding back enormous potential for violence. And they knew she chose not to use it. That, more than anything, shaped how they interacted with her. Not fear of what she could do, but respect for what she chose not to do. Understanding that humans were predators who had somehow managed to build a civilization based on cooperation rather than domination. Recognizing that they exercised voluntary restraint not from weakness, but from strength. The final reports to the Galactic Council were unanimous in their recommendation. Earth should be welcomed into the galactic community, not despite humans being dangerous, but because they were dangerous and had learned to control it. Because they understood that real strength included knowing when not to use force. Because they had turned a Deathworld and violent instincts into motivation for cooperation and growth. The Council approved the recommendation. Trade agreements were established. Diplomatic relations began. Humans started appearing throughout the galaxy, and everywhere they went, they carried that same duality. Friendly and helpful on the surface, capable of extreme violence underneath, always choosing the former despite being built for the latter. And at the Academy, Professor Kilnix stood at the main entrance preparing to welcome a new class of students. Among them would be 3 more humans, because Earth had requested expanded enrollment. He watched them arrive, noting their casual clothing, their easy smiles, their seemingly fragile builds. He knew better now. He knew what walked beneath that harmless exterior. He knew that each of them carried the same ancient predator instincts as the first human student, the same capacity for violence, the same remarkable control. He also knew they would probably be some of his best students, because humans who survived a Deathworld learned to be adaptable, persistent, and clever. They learned to cooperate despite competitive instincts. They learned to be gentle, despite having every reason to be brutal. As the new human students entered the academy, chatting and laughing and looking utterly harmless, Professor Kilnix felt that now familiar mixture of anxiety and respect. The galaxy had spent millennia believing that civilization required the evolution of gentleness, that truly advanced species left violence behind. Humans proved otherwise. They showed that civilization was not the absence of violence, but the choice to control it. They demonstrated that predators could build culture, that dangerous species could value peace, that Deathworld survivors could become diplomats. And perhaps most importantly, they reminded everyone that looking harmless and being harmless were very different things. The human students settled into their first class, pulling out their primitive notebooks and mechanical writing implements. Professor Kilnix began his introductory lecture, and one of the new humans raised her hand with a question. He braced himself and called on her, wondering what terrifying aspect of human existence he was about to learn. "Is there a cafeteria nearby?" she asked cheerfully. "I forgot to eat breakfast and I am starving." Professor Kilnix directed her to the dining facility, and the class continued normally. Just another day at the academy. Just another group of students from across the galaxy. Learning together, growing together, preparing for futures among the stars. Except now those students included humans. And the galaxy, despite its initial fears, would be better for it. Even if they still had no idea how to properly season food.